Hello, I'm with Richard Godfrey, who's the Managing Director of IPrinciples, which is a startup based in the UK, in Bath. You're in your second year now, and I just thought it'd be good to grab a bit of your time to find out why you decided to become a startup using Microsoft technology, and also why you decided to go with XAML, WPF and Silverlight. So tell me a little bit about how you started off as a startup in the UK.
Okay, well, hi. So yeah, we kicked off in about October 2007 as IPrinciples, and that was starting a startup was something I'd always wanted to do. So it was one of those things where you get cracking, you start to get into it, and try and drive off a few sort of core projects at the start. So our first project was a proof of concept with UK Sport, and we were trying to do a whole bunch of applications which were different UIs. So looking at how you might use the core parts of the structure of building an application, but direct it exactly at the process that people are using. And we found the best way to do that was to use tools that could provide the most unique, interesting UI to support that. And so the one we did to kick it off with was a three-dimensional view of the human body. And the application was looking at how you measure injuries and how you see the impacts of those injuries on training schedules for key performance athletes. And so we found the best way was to actually create a user interface, which was a three-dimensional view of the body. You could drill into the body, choose the various elements that have been injured, set parameters easily on that, and then have a data warehouse to report on the back of it.
And if we tried to build that thing on the Microsoft stack a few years ago, we'd have probably got into the world of C++ and DirectX, but you didn't go with those technologies.
No, and we didn't go with those technologies primarily because of the speed we needed to develop the thing. And so we had 3 months, start to finish, to build something that was just going to change the way that as a company, the perception that they had around the whole application development.
So when did that work kick off roughly? What month are we talking about?
So that was probably in October. So that was the first one we hit, and then by Christmas there we had that out, and that was being shown to people and used. Now
at the time, were you doing a lot of work raw with XAML at the time, or were you using tools to do that?
To be honest, we used while early versions of the design and blend tools were out, we spent a lot of time just handcrafting out of Visual Studio, to be honest. And a lot of that was not knowing how to use the tools particularly well, but knowing VS, but also just being able to understand it at a deep level to be able to know what you were creating.
Now, were you all developers at the time, or did you have a mix of developers and designers working on that project?
Yeah, we were all developers.
All developers.
So, all come from a very clear.
And having seen it, it actually looked quite nice, even though you're all developers. But you've got designers now working for you.
Yes, we've moved very much now, realising the need for that whole sort of integration of designers and developers to work together. So yeah, so we now have as many designers as developers in the team.
Okay. If I was looking out there now at current developments, I would find them using which tools? So the designers, what tools would they have installed on their desktops?
Okay, well we certainly use, and I hate to say it, but we use some of the Adobe stuff in terms of just pure image tools for Photoshop and that sort of stuff. And then once things have come out of Photoshop, we've used design an awful lot. So expression design has been one of the probably the biggest applications that gets used. And it's actually, although it's not a lot of people know about it a great deal, it's made a big difference to the way we build things.
And when you say not a lot of people know about expression design, I'm going to put myself in that camp. I think I might have been installed. What sort of things are the designers using design for?
So taking vector graphics and then creating XAML out of the back of that, and then using that as an input into the blend tools and Visual Studio itself. So the mix of bitmap graphics, vector graphics, and then being able to make those in different layers and being able to use those in a way that you can suck them straight into the application development tools has been really powerful.
So nearly all your projects now are based around XAML for the user interface?
Yeah, so we specialised as an organisation. That was one of the core things we wanted to do, was get a clear base on what we build and the technologies we use. IPrinciples has always been, the concept for it has been creating a company which is always at the leading edge, sometimes at the bleeding edge, but certainly using the latest technologies and finding a way to do that. That blend and design have been core to that.
And when you tell customers the technologies you're using, I imagine there's a bunch who go, I have no interest, but those who are, do they come back at you with things like Flash and Flex from Adobe? Why are you using those technologies?
You know what? It's very rare you have a discussion with a customer which is about the technology that's being used. I mean, there's occasionally you get the discussion around the amount of distribution there is of things like Silverlight versus Flash. But then you can do different things with them as technologies. So quite often it makes a lot of sense to have something we've found is have a Flash video on the front page of a website because that has the most distribution at the moment. But maybe have a high-def version of a video in Silverlight or have the application developed in Silverlight. So when people want to go a little bit deeper than just the front page of a website, they can get a really engaging full user interaction experience.
And you started out with WPF, but some of the recent projects have been Silverlight 2 projects.
Sure.
And would any of those original WPF projects be in Silverlight if you'd started them again? Just curious.
You know what, I don't think they would at the moment. I think, so we, obviously, some of the things like 3D have been a real core differentiator in the UI. And while not wanting to overuse it, there's times when it just makes sense to make, using a particular metaphor makes a lot more sense. So the human body was a great example there. We're doing a lot of stuff around books, which are three-dimensional physical objects that you want to pick up. And being able to use that in 3D makes a big difference. And while Silverlight 3 sort of heads towards 3D, it's still not the kind of the full fidelity thing that we're looking for. So WPF for us has been a core skill, and we always took the view that WPF being sort of the big brother, if you like, of Silverlight, that Silverlight would always be catching up to it. And if we focused on the full fidelity WPF experience, we'd always be able to downgrade that to the more ubiquitous Silverlight stuff. And that's been true so far.
So I'm going to sit down with a couple of your designers later to have a look at a Silverlight 2 application and a WPF application. Any work on Silverlight 3 at the moment?
We've looked at it and little bits of playing around with it, but no, we have no actual projects going with it. And to be honest, Silverlight 2 has been actually getting projects driven out with the adoption that's there. We still feel like we're at the leading edge of some of that. I think feedback to Microsoft is how to push Silverlight 2 and get that just on everybody's machine will make that whole process an awful lot easier for the likes of us.
You're a little bit unusual in that you're one of hundreds of startups, but hundreds of startups.
Not the first to say that, Eric.
Hundreds of startups using Microsoft technology, but traditionally startups went open source. They were looking to use free tools. You're a member of BizSpark?
Yeah.
And the advantage of being in BizSpark was?
Well, BizSpark for us, so we looked at, when we first kicked off IPrinciples, was how do we get access to the tools and technologies, SDKs, as cheaply as possible. And we started off with the Empower program at the time for that. So we went into the first year of doing that when BizSpark came along. And the idea for us of having access for 3 years, or until we reach a certain level of turnover for free as a development environment, development and test was huge. But also with BizSpark going into production for a period with all the licenses covered as well was enormous. And so it almost levels the playing field as far as we saw it between all of the open source stuff and the Microsoft world.
So if you're bumping into a startup, I know you're based in an innovation centre, so you come across a lot of startups. You recommend the Microsoft stack and BizSpark as a good way of doing it?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we've already encouraged a number of other people to join BizSpark as a result of us doing it and the experience we've had. So, yeah, totally recommend it. I mean, why not take something for nothing for a period if it's going to make your life easier, and you can hook into other things like Microsoft PR and those sorts of things.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to recording some sessions with your designers the rest of the day.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.